Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, June 6th, 2025, and our friend Dmitry Orlov is back with us. Welcome back, Dmitry.
Great to be with you.
Dmitry, before starting today's talk, let us know how can we support you and how can we access what you write about your geopolitical views on your weblog, your website. How can we access that?
I blog on Boosty, which is a Russian platform that is accessible from the West through a Dutch company. Um, and the URL for my blog is http:// or https:// boosty, boosty.to. TO stands for the island of Tonga in the Pacific, where this website is registered. Slash Club Orlov, Club, CLUB, Orlov, ORLOV. So if you want to continue the discussion, I will be posting this video on my blog, and then there will be probably some lively discussion following that, probably of higher quality than what you generally get in the comment section on YouTube, which is generally just kind of like random junk. Whereas on my website, the discussions tend to be very interesting. So I hope that you join. I hope that you subscribe. A lot of the articles I publish are for subscribers only to keep out the riffraff, so to speak, face control. So I hope to see you there.
I hope so. Dimitri, let's get started with what has happened with the latest events in Russia and Ukraine. We had a drone attack on nuclear bombers in Russia and two attacks on the bridges in the Kursk and Bryansk regions. How, in your opinion, this sort of escalation, we know that without, as Russians were talking about, without the intelligence coming from the United States and Europeans, Ukrainians were not able to do this. Your take on the main objectives of what Ukrainians were doing and have done in these two regions.
Well, I think the Ukrainian logic is very simple. They're not winning on the battlefield, and there is no chance at all that they will win on the battlefield, no matter what weapons the West tries to provide them with. They're losing, and they're losing very steadily. Um, the Russians are in no rush to defeat them quickly, and as a result, to suffer more casualties. The Russians are minimizing casualties and maximizing Ukrainian casualties. That is their entire approach. And so what the Ukrainians are doing, what the Ukrainian regime is doing, is trying to demonstrate to their Western patrons, if you will, that they're still good for something. So look, we're not really warriors, but we're good terrorists. Don't you like terrorists? You funded ISIS for a long time. You gave Osama bin Laden lots of money. Why not us? Um, we're good for it. Look, we blew up some 40-year-old strategic bombers, and I think four of them got damaged. Nobody knows whether they're beyond repair or not, but they're 40-year-old uh, airframes, and so that is not a huge deal for Russia. And a huge deal for Russia is that 117 people got hurt by this um, railway accident that was staged by the Ukrainians. The forensic evidence shows that the Ukrainians were behind it. They used U.S.-made plastic explosive, large amounts of it, and the trigger was a remote electronic trigger that is typically used by the Ukrainians for terrorist attacks, and they've used it repeatedly. So that's the smoking gun that Russia needs to pin it on the Ukrainians. And then there was the completely failed attack on the long-suffering Kerch Bridge that links Crimea with the Russian mainland. And that attack went nowhere. They used a robot submarine and some robot surface vessels. Um, they didn't penetrate uh, the boom and netting that protects the pylons that the bridge rests on. So there was really no damage. Plus, the bridge is designed to withstand similar attacks. Um, the supports are surrounded by these pucks, large, massive pucks of reinforced concrete that are designed to withstand huge explosions, relatively huge explosions. So traffic on the bridge was paused for a few hours twice, and that was all the damage there. But what is really significant is the number of casualties on the terrorist attack on the railway, and it is shifting the public opinion in Russia from considering the Ukrainians as a brotherly people, basically same as the Russians, speaking the same language, going to the same churches, basically having the same culture, same history, shared history, etc. Watching these people rejoice and treat these terrorist attacks as their victories, which some of that was quite obvious in social media and on Ukrainian television, etc. That is shifting public opinion in Russia from thinking that these people are too far gone to be reclaimed as Russian, and so that is going to some extent lift the psychological barrier on um, on just blowing them up, just basically treating them as non-Russian populations that are at war with Russia, and collateral damage doesn't matter. Um, so that is a really bad thing for the Ukrainians to have done for their own population. Of course, the Ukrainian regime doesn't care about their people at all. They're fighting a losing battle down to the last Ukrainian. But that is really psychologically how that affects the conflict. And I think that that's significant. Now, in terms of some people hyperventilating, saying, well, Russian strategic bombers, all four of them got attacked and damaged, and that could trigger a nuclear confrontation between the superpowers because of a certain clause in the Russian nuclear doctrine that says that a non-nuclear state that attacks Russian nuclear assets with support from another nuclear state, which is sort of the case here. The Ukrainian drones use Starlink to communicate with whoever was flying them, in fact. That could trigger a nuclear confrontation. But there's a problem with that. The attack wasn't serious. Okay, in one case, they did destroy some nuclear capable strategic bombers. Were they actually part of the nuclear triad at the moment? Maybe they won't. Maybe they weren't armed. Maybe they were demonstration projects. They're updating these old 40-year-old um, supersonic jets. Um, they have an M in their designation, which means modernized. But maybe they were not part of the nuclear triad at all. In some cases, the attack was just the inability of the Americans to interpret satellite images. So in one place in Siberia, an airport was attacked that was used to store dead jets. Some of them didn't even have engines. Okay, so basically they wrecked some written off jets that were waiting to be scrapped. And the reputational damage for for destroying scrap is, not exactly a victory. Let me put it that way. So, in all, I would say that the attack on the passenger train is significant because it has shifted the psychology in Russia more in the direction of ignoring collateral damage on the attacks on the Ukrainian territory, and also it has certified the Kiev regime as a terrorist regime. Therefore, international law and diplomacy and all of that, and negotiations, peace talks, whatever, all of that is out the window. I want to make it clear there will be no negotiations with the Kiev regime past this point. It's a terrorist regime. Terrorists need to be killed, and Russia is going to kill them. That has been stipulated already. Um, and so that's the change that has taken place.
We had Donald Trump calling Vladimir Putin, talking with him, and he said he didn't know about it. He wasn't aware of what's going on. Two sides of this sort of argument on his part. If he knew, that's problematic. If he didn't know, also problematic. In your opinion, when he said that to Vladimir Putin, and we argue in this, don't you think that he's putting himself in a position that would humiliate him, would somehow shows that how ineffective he is in his position?
Well, everybody and his dog knows that Trump is ineffective as president. What has he achieved as president so far? Nothing. And he's gone back on all of his campaign promises, and he's basically a blabbermouth. He's a clown, just like Zelensky is a clown. Um, he's basically a show host or something. He's not the president. But the Americans are used to that. They went through 4 years of not having a president at all. As it turns out, they had an auto pen president. So now they have a blabbermouth president. Now, you said that Putin called Zelensky. I mean, Trump called
Yeah,
Putin.
yeah.
That is not factual. We don't know who called whom. We know that the conversation took place because both sides said that there was a conversation. It took an hour and 15 minutes. Everybody's in agreement about that. What they talked about, we don't know. They could have talked about the weather. Now, what Trump knows or doesn't know, what people tell him, what they don't tell him, again, sort of irrelevant. But the message went out that, oh, I didn't know. Okay, so that means that I'm not responsible. That means that you can be absolutely free to blow up the Kiev regime at your pleasure, and we won't stir. They did a bad thing. They're terrorists. What can we say? They used to be nice guys. We thought they were nice guys. Now it turns out that they're bastards. So just treat it as an internal Russian problem. That is the basic message. So the Ukraine is no longer a subject of international law. It's a subject for Russia to deal with as an internal Russian problem.
What's so important in the way that Donald Trump is trying to communicate with Russians is that as though they're somehow out of the discussion, they're somehow are not involved in what's going on in Ukraine. We know that without the intelligence, without the military support of the United States, the, the Zelensky administration and his army, they're not capable of doing anything. Even with the support of Europeans, they're not that capable of providing Ukraine with everything they need in the conflict in between the two countries, Ukraine and Russia. How long does it take to Russia to make Donald Trump understand that this is the essential support of his administration, his country, that is letting this conflict going on and on? Because at the end of the day, there has to be some rough and solid talks between the two presidents that shows that these we are not fighting with Ukrainians. We are fighting with you, and you have to decide about the future of the conflict.
Well, it's the American state, if you want to call it that, is not very controllable at this moment. So basically, there are a lot of CIA types that are dead set against Donald Trump and really want to hurt him. They don't really follow orders from him. We don't know what's going on at the Pentagon. They have some guy in charge of the Pentagon now who hasn't been in charge of such an organization ever before in his life. Um, and so these are people who are just basically confused. They're babes in the woods. They've never run such huge, ineffectual bureaucracies before. So I don't think the Russians are really counting on making able to make agreements with the Americans. They've tried that before. You know, they they consider Americans non-agreement capable. So from the Russian point of view, it is rather helpful if the Americans get the hell out of Europe. And the Americans think that it would be, well, Trump for one, and the people around him seem to think that getting out of Europe is also a good idea. The problem is that all of Europe now is run by these Atlanticist zombies who have been brainwashed to think that the national interests of European countries do not exist. They're basically there to support the United States as a unit. And if the United States is leaving, they're suddenly they're kind of they're lobotomized. They don't know what to think or what to think with. And Bundeskanzler uh, Merz now is just completely lost because his entire career was basically being coddled by Americans and doing the Americans' bidding and being nice to the Americans and just basically kissing ass. He was just in the White House, and what did he do? He kissed ass. He doesn't know how to do anything else except kiss American ass. And if American ass doesn't want to be kissed, he's out of a job. Basically, he doesn't have any other competences. So, and that is typical of most European leaders at this point. Ever since Merkel, Germany has been run by these, pro-American sycophants who don't think that Germany is really a country. Um, and so it's very important for them to keep this conflict going because now that they've cut their ties with Russia, the quality of life in Europe will be dropping all the time. People are going to be suffering, they're going to be poor. And the only way to explain to their people that this is just the way it should be, that this is inevitable and even heroic for them to suffer this way, is for there to be a war and for Russia to be portrayed as an existential threat, which is what they're trying to do. It's based on some lies, but they're very good at lying, so that's not a problem.
In Europe, do you think the main problem is Germany as is growing is growing to be a bigger problem for Russia and for the region, or as we saw in the Kursk region during those attacks in invasion of the Kursk region, everybody was talking about that the British intelligence is behind us, what has happened in the Kursk region. Right now, it seems that the same case is going to be considered for the attacks on Russia. It seems that the British intelligence has a lot of leverage on the administration in Ukraine, even more than the Trump administration. How, if we assume that Donald Trump didn't know about it, if we assume that somehow CIA was helping the Ukrainian, uh, I don't know, army and the Zelensky administration behind the scene and participating in some sort of cooperation with British, who what is the main goal that the British government is pursuing in Ukraine? Because so far I don't see anything positive coming out of the conflict in Ukraine in favor of the British government and the British intelligence or whatever they have, whatever what any sort of strategy that they have in their mind. How, what is the ultimate goal on their part, in your opinion, with these sort of attacks?
Well, they lost in Kursk. It was a NATO attack on Russia, with Ukrainians just basically going in as cannon fodder and getting killed. It's basically it's a huge funeral for the Ukraine. Something like 75,000 people got killed. The entire part of the region that they temporarily took over is just littered with rotting Ukrainian corpses. It's disgusting. The Russians are having a lot of trouble organizing teams to scrape these remains together and bag them and freeze them. And the problem is that uh, the protocol is that they have to identify these remains, DNA testing, whatever, and then return them to the Ukrainian side, which the Russians are very much willing to do. The problem is that the Kiev regime doesn't want to accept these corpses because if these corpses are identified, then they have to pay out money, significant money, to the families of these soldiers, and they don't have the money. The Kiev regime is bankrupt. It's just defaulted on some bonds. It is basically in default internationally, and so it can't really scrape together the money to pay um, compensation to families for 75,000 dead soldiers. Well, okay, 20% of them are mercenaries, but the rest are Ukrainians, and so they're doing nasty things like saying, well, it'll take us 2 years to process the paperwork, so maybe in 2 years they'll pay some money to the families, but not until then. And so that's really what's happening now. You could say, oh yeah, the British are behind it. Um, it to to a large extent, it doesn't matter who the idiot is who messed up. It doesn't matter whether it was the British or the French who are the idiots behind this campaign. The important thing is that it's a failed campaign. It has, first of all, they invaded Russia, which is a dumb thing to do to begin with, because now suddenly it's not, for the Russians, it's not a campaign to defend the rights of Russians wherever they may live, such as in the Ukraine, which is a good step forward for Russia, but um, perhaps non-essential. But now it's a question of defending the motherland, which is a sacred duty. And as soon as these foreign troops rolled into Kursk, the number of men reporting and volunteering for the army went up by an order of magnitude. And so Russia has no trouble with new recruits, not even recruits, volunteers, new volunteers. Russia has two whole armies now that aren't being used, that are just basically continuously training and rearming and honing their skills, ready for anything. And that is the result of Kursk.
Dmitry, Vladimir Putin said that he's going to respond to what has happened in, in with the nuclear bombers and the two regions, Kursk and Bryansk, and we know that they attacked the Crimean bridge as well. They're continuing to attack with drones and with these terrorist attacks. To what extent that Russia is prepared to respond to what has happened? Is that going to be something big out of the front line of the conflict, or is it going to be more strategic on the battlefield, on the front line, to achieve something big on the battlefield?
Well, why change anything on the battlefield? I mean, I'm not a military expert, but I see absolutely no reason for Russia to do anything different from what it's doing now. So basically, what it does on the battlefield is identify where enemy troops are, kill them, give some of them a chance to surrender, and then take over that territory. Lather, rinse, repeat. It's all in a day's work. Safety first, and don't waste munitions unless you have good, solid battlefield intelligence. So why would they do something spectacular? Who are they trying to impress? Themselves? They don't need to impress themselves. They're just doing their job. Are they trying to impress foreigners? No, they really don't care what foreigners think. They're liberating their own territory, and they're creating buffer zones so that their territory is never attacked again. So that's just a very mundane kind of, uh, military engineering work. Um, Now, in terms of these drone attacks, there are little factories all over the Ukraine. Some, well, some big, some little, that put together these drones, assembled them. There are also cargo ships pulling into Odessa, mostly, that deliver parts for these drones. So what the Russians are doing is blowing up these factories and blowing up these cargo ships. They've been doing that at night to avoid collateral damage because the thinking is, well, these people who are paid to put together drones for the Ukrainians, well, they're just kind of like, they're on the wrong side, but that could be fixed, and in the future they could be putting together drones for the Russian side. So why kill them? They're useful. I don't know if that sort of thinking is going to continue, because if you destroy a factory that puts together drones, well, you could organize another factory somewhere else, as long as you have the staff to do it. But if you kill the people who work at the factory, then you demoralize the rest, and then lo and behold, nobody wants to build drones anymore because the chances of getting killed while doing so are kind of high. And so that would be effective. And I can see where the Russians are thinking in those terms now.
Do you feel that the mindset on the part of the Russian government is changing somehow toward what's going on in Washington? They started to feel that these are the changes that they were hoping to happen with the Trump administration, with the way that Donald Trump himself was talking about Ukraine. Those hopes are just fading away, in your opinion?
Well, I think everybody in the world, not just the Russians, know that Trump is basically a, uh, an NPC in video game terms, a non-playable character. I mean, you basically, you hit him with a stick and he says something, and you hit him with a stick again and he says something else, and it changes from day to day. So one day Putin is a hero, the next day Putin is a terrible person, and then next day he's wonderful and beautiful. And one day you're going to make America great, and the next day you're going to raise the budget deficit by 2.5 trillion, and it's all great and it's all wonderful. And and meanwhile, um, you know, things fall apart because of the one person who is competent in the entire administration, as far as I can tell. Elon Musk is gone,
Yeah.
and furthermore has called for Trump to be impeached because Trump is an idiot. So Musk thinks, obviously. So what does that mean for the United States? Means that once again the United States is without a president. But that's nothing new. It went through a 4-year period without a president. So what's another 4-year period without a president? Next they should elect somebody who's actually dead. That would be new and different.
You mentioned Elon Musk, and right now, somehow, the interactions between the two characters, the two people, are so much mind blowing, and they're going against each other, fighting and attacking each other. Is that what MAGA needed? Is that what they wanted? Because what's going on right now is somehow the opposite way, that those dreams on the part of the people who voted for this sort of movement in the United States right now, they're just sitting and seeing what's going on between the two main characters of the movement, just fighting each other, attacking each other in the in an ugly way, by the way. How is that going to help the movement in the United States? Do they really, or Elon Musk said we need a third party in the United States going forward? Do you think that's going to be possible, even with the support of Elon Musk?
I don't think it matters. I think that uh, Trump is the president because he ran some beauty pageants and some casinos, and what else has he done? He ran some talk shows, and I forget. He did some other. Oh yeah, wrestling. He was into wrestling, pro wrestling. Now all of those things are fakey, fake, 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 and so Trump's brain is basically a fake news generator, and that's what Americans needed, wanted, love, and approve of. And so what we're seeing now between Trump and Musk is basically knockdown, drag out, kind of like a pro wrestling um, match, and people love it. The whole thing behind Trump is he wants to make enough noise so that people keep paying attention to him. The truth is, there's nothing going on. You know, the America is still just basically aiming for the ditch, um, and speeding up, and nobody can change it. And so having a clown in the White House is very helpful because it's a distraction.
Yeah. Looking at the argument on part of Europeans and Donald Trump when they're talking with officials in Russia, even Zelensky administration, they're pushing for ceasefire. What does that mean for Russia, and how Russia does see ceasefire without having a substantial agreement between the two parties? I'm not talking about Ukrainians, but between Russia and the West and the collective West, not Europeans, but also not but also the United States under the Trump administration. Do you feel that as time goes by, Russia would change its mindset toward the ceasefire, or they're going to keep the same sort of policy? No ceasefire, we're going to fight, we're going to have to decide about the articles in the memorandum. Because when you look at the latest talks between Russia and Ukraine, the main objective of those articles in the memorandum, as far as we know, are is the United States. It's not even Europe. How is that going to be perceived by the Trump administration if Kiev regime reported on that to them?
Um, Overall, I have no idea how to answer that question. In terms of peace talks, there were no peace talks. There were technical neg- discussions, not even negotiations. Um, they did not address anything except exchange of prisoners, reunification of families, and uh, the the remains of the deceased being exchanged. Lots of deceased on that the Russians have, of Ukrainians that the Russians have, very few that the Ukrainians hold. So even that hit a snag. In terms of memoranda being exchanged, well, the Russians put together a list of what would be required if there were peace, which the Ukrainian regime is in no position to accept for any number of reasons. And so it was not accepted. The Ukrainians cooked up a memorandum of their own, which goes straight in the trash. It's not even worth talking about. The losing side telling the winning side what it would like is hilarious if you think about it. Um, and in terms of future discussions, Russia does not negotiate with terrorists. The end. So that's basically it as far as that goes. Now, what does that mean for the United States? What does that mean for Europe? It means that Russia has won. That's all. That's all that they have to process. It means that if they continue supporting um, the Kiev regime, then they are assisting terrorists, and they become terrorist accomplices. And in the future, they will have a lot of trouble dealing with the Russians and convincing the Russians that they're not terrorists themselves. And seeing as they can't really survive without lots of stuff that Russia provides, That may mean that they will have to deindustrialize a lot more rapidly than they had planned.
Yeah. One of the main points that Vladimir Putin mentioned as the reason of these attacks on Russia is that they don't want Russia to negotiate. They didn't want Russia to be in Istanbul talking with Ukrainians. I think his point is so much crucial when it comes to the efforts, to the way that Europeans trying to manipulate the situation in Ukraine. They're not happy that Russia started negotiating or talking directly with Ukrainians because they had Donald Trump in office in Washington. They, I'm talking about the British government, German and French government, somehow mediating the talks between the Trump administration and the Kiev regime and the government in Kiev. And they were able to manipulate that. Right now, with the new talks directly between the two parties in, involved in the conflict in Ukraine, it seems that they're somehow feeling that everything is getting out of their hand. That's why there has to be something done by on their part to what's going on, and maybe making convincing Russia that the talks are not working. We're not going to go to Istanbul if they're attacking us. how how do you perceive, how do you understand that?
Well, I see no discussions between the Ukraine and Russia. There aren't any. There's basically some technical communication, as I mentioned. There are no negotiations. The memorandum might as well be a Russian internal document, basically the Russians keeping score on their side. And the function there is to keep the Russians um, happy with the way the war is going and convince the Russians that no, the Russian government is not taking any steps back, is not compromising, because the Russians are very much afraid that, well, some Russians are very much afraid that Putin will compromise. So Putin is not compromising, and everyone's happy. Now, in terms of what the Europeans are doing, um, I I don't know what's going on, but maybe Zelensky got them all hooked on cocaine because now I see Mark Rutte, who is the head of NATO, thumbing his nose at the camera and then uh, jibber jabbering like a mad person on cocaine. And if you listen to their talks, I haven't consulted any clinical psychiatrists on this, but it seems like basically they're on drugs. The Europeans, the European leadership. First of all, they got caught snorting cocaine on that train, but since then they've been going on like they're on drugs, like they're on cocaine all the time, or maybe meth. If it's meth, then that's really bad. That means that there are giant holes opening up in their brains, because it's just physically fries the brain. But they're not really, helping themselves. The whole point is that if they give up on this idea of a war in Europe, then they won't be able to control their populations, because populations become very upset when their quality of life keeps dropping for no reason, because all of their money got wasted on a bunch of criminals in Kiev, terrorists in Kiev. That might make them unhappy. So you have to keep them convinced that Russia is a threat. And they're doing their best to flap their gums at the camera to convince their populations that Russia is a threat. Russia doesn't give a damn about Europe. That's the real bottom line. Russia does not give a damn about Europe.
I don't know, we can call it comedy or tragedy, what's going on with Europe. They were involved in the attack on Russia, the latest attack, and then Stormer coming out that we are under attack, we are threatened by Russia, we have to build up our military, we have to spend a lot of money on NATO's military buildup. And how is when it comes to NATO and the threats, we know one of the main reasons of what's going on in Ukraine is the way that NATO was behaving before the conflict started. Do you feel that NATO is somehow changing its behavior? Is just building up its military, or is just weakening as time goes by? What's your understanding on the way that the war in Ukraine has changed the mindset in Europe? I'm talking about European leaders. We know that that wouldn't be the case for European public opinion. But what's going on in terms of the change that has happened in the mind of European leaders? And right now they're thinking of building up n- new military, I don't know, new bombs, new missiles, whatever that would be.
They're not thinking in terms of weapons. They're not really practical minded. If they were, they'd be in shock because NATO has lost on the battlefield in the Ukraine. The Ukrainian military has been lavishly equipped. It was given everything it needed for its counterattack in 2023. So ever since then, this has been basically a kind of slow motion steamroller ride for the Russians uh, across the Ukrainian countryside. Yesterday, they took over how many towns? 5, 10 little towns. They don't want to attack big cities until the Ukrainians just decide to give up and leave, because it's more difficult. It's easier to cut off the logistics by taking over small towns. So it's just this grinding um, sort of takeover of what is now Russian territory that's Ukrainian occupied as far as Russians are concerned. But the point is that NATO has lost. NATO has nothing. NATO cannot fight Russia. If they make new weapons, they would make the same failed weapons that failed in the Ukraine. They cannot make weapons on their own. They have to buy lots of parts from the United States. There are a lot of weapon systems. This is the way NATO has been constructed all along. Americans made sure that NATO couldn't do anything without them. So this is all just kind of like a waste. They're arming, uh, and in order to, or they're talking about arming. What they're really talking about is borrowing money that should be spent on armaments, but will probably be stolen by various subcontractors, etc. So it's a personal self-enrichment scheme for a lot of people, as far as I understand. But in terms of actually making weapons that would be useful for something, I don't think they're capable of doing that. I think the Russians and the Chinese are too far advanced in the arms race. Russia has basically won the arms race, and NATO has absolutely no way of catching up, no matter how much money they borrow, no matter how deep in debt they go. And so it's all a game of perception. They have to paint a picture of Russia as an existential threat, um, because otherwise they would lose their political power. And the one thing that they cannot bear to hear is that Russia can't possibly um, care to attack them at all because they have nothing. Uh, what do they want? Steal their migrants? What could Russia possibly want? The people who want to leave Western Europe and move to Russia are doing that anyway in droves with their families, and the Russians are all in favor of that. That has happened before in various times of history when Europe was doing badly, as it is now. But other than that, Russia doesn't want Europe for anything, and that is the ultimate horrible thing that you could say to European leaders that would make them quake in their boots.
I think the point that Vladimir Putin mentioned in the talks about the way that they're trying to sabotage the negotiation in Istanbul could be part of the picture. The bigger picture, what I see is happening is not only sabotaging the negotiation, but also putting a lot of pressure on the new policies in Washington in terms of negotiating, talking with Russia, trying to somehow solve and find a some sort of solution for the conflict. You see the way that Lindsey Graham, together with Blumenthal and Pompeo, went to Ukraine, trying to. We have a new sort of sanctions to put on Russia, 500% secondary sanctions, while the British government maybe has planned to show look, if you just lift the limitation on the Ukrainian army to attack Russia, deep into Russia, they're capable of doing everything. To convince, we know that Donald Trump is somehow can be manipulated easily with these sort of arguments. But how, when it comes to 500% tariffs or sanctions on Russia, the main targets of these tariffs would be China, India, and even European countries. How is that going to work for the mindset, for this aggressive, for this radical mindset in the West that is has endless hatred toward Russia? Is that going to work for them?
No, sanctions don't work for disrupting Russia in any sense. They do work for disrupting the West to a great extent. The this 500% tariff thing. Well, think about how that's going to happen. Um, uh, Russia sends half of its oil to China directly, and that's a ruble yuan trade that the Americans don't even know about. So, will China cut off oil imports from Russia? Um, that's a huge amount of oil. No, China will not do that. Will China start paying 500% duty on its exports to the United States? Well, that would be interesting. But what the Russians and the Chinese will probably do is make sure that Russian oil stops being Russian. You know how you do that? You mix it with some other stuff. You mix it with some oil from somewhere else. And suddenly it's not Russian oil anymore. And check the paperwork if you disagree. That's what they've been doing the entire time. You realize, you can't write a sanctions document that is bulletproof enough so that people don't find a loophole in it. So there'll be lots of loopholes. That's all that's going to happen. Lindsey Graham is just too stupid to understand that that's how it actually works. They're parallel exports, parallel imports, forged paperwork, tankers that nobody knows who they belong to. You basically re-register them as they pass from one jurisdiction to another. They do so with the transponder turned off, so nobody knows which tanker is whose, etc. And that's how it's going to continue. In terms of Russia paying any attention to these new sanctions, well, it doesn't really matter to Russia that much as well. Um, these hydrocarbon exports, duties on hydrocarbon exports, make up a quarter of Russia's uh, national budget revenue. That's a large number, but half of that is China, so it's actually an eighth, and half again of that is India, so actually a 16th. So the part of it that Americans could conceivably do anything at all with is about 1/16 of the Russians of Russia's revenue stream, government revenue stream. And so that's a bit of an ouch for Russia, perhaps. But then you have to remember that the military-industrial complex in Russia has zero dependence on imports, does not require foreign currency, and is happy no matter what sanctions are imposed. And the rest of the Russian manufacturing community is very happy with sanctions because it means that they have more work with import replacement. So, as I said before, more sanctions, please. And if Lindsey Graham actually pushes through his idiotic 500% tariff, well, more power to him. Let these idiots self-destruct. Russia doesn't care.
Yeah. 500% tariffs, it means the price of energy go higher for Germany. And we know that the German chancellor in the United States, when he met with Donald Trump, he said that they're going to be dependent on the United States for such a long time. here comes the question: which one would be affordable for Germany? Russian energy with 500% tariffs, secondary tariffs or sanctions, or the United States energy coming from the United States? But the amount of energy that they need is so much important. It is the key. Do they really believe that uh, they can buy all whatever they need from the United States directly, or somehow it's impossible for the United States to provide Europe with the level of energy that they need?
Well, first of all, it's not the United States that's providing, liquefied natural gas or oil, whatever, um, because the U.S. government doesn't own these assets. It doesn't even own the LNG tanker fleet. These are all foreign owned. For instance, the LNG tanker fleet is to a fair extent owned by India. Um, the Americans cannot snap their fingers and say this goes to Europe or this goes to China or somewhere else. That is determined by the market, and the market sends the tankers to whoever pays the most. And whoever can pay the most for this energy is whoever has the highest productivity and the lowest cost of doing business, and that is not Europe. So when you talk about America sending its energy to Europe or not sending its energy to Europe, or competing with Russia, that's not really what's happening at all. The United States is not really in control of the markets in question. For instance, it has to export liquefied natural gas, which comes out of Texas mostly, Louisiana, Texas, and then it has to turn around and import liquefied natural gas to get it into Boston, because there's no pipeline between the two. Furthermore, it cannot ship Texas gas to Boston, because that would be coastwise trading. Um, and since the vessels, LNG tankers, are not built in the United States, coastwise trading is forbidden by some ancient American piece of legislation. So you can't really talk about, say, well, Trump wants to do this or Trump wants to do that. Trump just runs his mouth, that's all that happens. But it's a global market. It doesn't matter who sanctions what, because somebody could buy the oil, and then that somebody could be a country that doesn't even trade with the United States, but can be given money to buy tankers with, and that would be fine. So there are lots of ways around sanctions, and in any case, the U.S. doesn't really control anything.
With the second part of discussions, the talks between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump was about Iran and the talks between the United States and Iran in terms of Iranian nuclear program. And Putin said that he's willing to participate in the negotiation or help or facilitate the negotiations. When it comes to Iran and the way that Russia sees Iran, what is do you think that as time goes by, countries like Iran, Russia, and China are getting closer? And how much of how important is Iran for Russia? And the relationship between Iran and Russia, we know that they have a new strategic agreement, but how is that going to be translated in the foreign policy of the two countries, in your opinion?
Well, Russia and Iran are allies. Um, they they basically agreed to come to each other's help. Um, uh, uh, Iran is a client of Russia as far as nuclear energy. There's a nuclear reactor at Bushehr, another one is being built. They're going to be fueled by Russia, and it basically, when Russia builds nuclear power plants abroad, what they sell is basically the entire closed nuclear cycle system with fuel for many decades into the future, which makes it a very good deal for a lot of countries, including NATO countries such as Turkey, because of Akuyu plant. But then there's uh, the uranium enrichment program in Iran, which is a prestige project. You see, the United States cannot enrich uranium. It doesn't have the technology, it doesn't have the scientists. All it can do is import some slightly um, out of date um, French technology. Basically, there are some Areva plants in the United States that produces enriched uranium for the United States. Not good enough for weapons work, but good enough for fueling nuclear power plants. But the Americans themselves don't know how to enrich uranium. They don't have their centrifuge projects have all failed. Meanwhile, Iran is doing better and better, and this is a prestige project. Theoretically, they could enrich uranium to a point where they can make nuclear bombs, but there's a fatwa against building nuclear bombs in Iran, and they agreed not to build nuclear weapons. So this is kind of an odd situation where Russia doesn't really need enriched uranium capacity in Iran. It has its own, but it might come in useful because there's a build out of nuclear energy projects around the world, and if Iran wants to get into the enriched uranium market, that would be kind of useful. But Russia doesn't directly need it. But what the United States needs is a guarantee that Iran will not use this enriched uranium to build nuclear weapons, and Russia is willing to assist with that. And so, what 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 Trump has asked for was for Iran to just end its nuclear enrichment program altogether, which Iran is not going to agree to. And I don't know why Trump would think that that's a good idea to ask for the impossible. Um, so uh, Russia's function in that would probably be to talk down Americans and explain to them that what they're asking for is unnecessary and impossible at the same time, and to somehow wrestle them down to some reasonable arrangement.
Dimitri, when it comes to the international community, we supposed to think of the UN, but it seems that the UN is not working, it's not functioning anymore. So what would be the option on the table is the only option would be BRICS and the countries that are joining BRICS. How do you see the international community, whatever that would be, UN, BRICS, and how can they bring some sort of sanity to what's going on? Because look at Ukraine, you could look at the Middle East, maybe the future conflict in Ukraine. We are risking a huge, maybe a world war over a little fight, a little somehow conflict that can be solved by sane people negotiating, talking to each other, re, some sort of diplomacy that we haven't seen for many years during the this sort of hegemony, the United States being the sole superpower, the only superpower and running everything. The time has changed, everything is changing. And so the diplomacy, there has to be some sort of communication lines between the countries. How do you see that happening right now?
Well, I don't think any of that is necessary. I think what's necessary is bilateral relations, lines of communication open between the United States and Russia, and that's functioning. So we had this phone call that took place between Putin and Trump. Nobody even knows who called whom. But the result of that was that Trump said, I didn't know. And that was the most wonderful thing for him to say. Um, Borderline with, I don't exist, you know, but that wouldn't have been as convincing. He could have said, there's no president in the United States, something like that. but I didn't know is good enough. So basically, that's a gigantic oops. And after that, the United States won't participate, and that's fine. And then there won't be a World War III. Um, so if you look at all of these countries that are in Europe that are waiting for Russia to attack them, Russia doesn't want to attack them. It's terrible. They're going to waste all this money and prepare for war, and Russia won't even show up. It's like I threw a party, I had it catered, and lots of champagne and dancing girls and all this, and the guest of honor doesn't show up. It's a huge embarrassment, you know. So do we need the UN to negotiate that? No, just let them knock themselves out, arming themselves with obsolete toys that have already been demonstrated to be ineffective in the Ukraine over a 3-year period. And they have no ideas. They have no new technologies. The Russians and the Chinese have new technologies, but they won't share them. So what is there to do except, uh, tell people how strong and powerful you are and prepared for Russian attack, and then cry.
Before wrapping up, Dimitri, let us know how can we support you.
All right. Well, once again, I would very much like everyone to read my blog, because I publish an article or two every week. It's usually a lot more than I can squeeze into a 1 hour a week conversation, get into a lot more detail, a lot more facts. Um, and so the URL is boosty.to, boosty.to/Club Orlov, CLUBORLOV. Hope to see you there.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always. Take care.
Thank you, Nima.
See
Bye
you
bye.
soon. Bye bye.